And I think, people see it as a huge opportunity to have millions of people thinking about Paris in that way. I did see that the tour was, I think, at least 5 days, and I was wondering what they were going to do for all that time, because once you've put on your red beret and seen the locations, I wonder how else you can beat Emily. But yeah.
Yeah, and the price per person in sterling, 2,155, and you'll be sharing a room. You have to pay a bit extra if you want a room on your own. Anyway, it's all commerce, I suppose. But Hannah, thank you very much for talking to us about Emily in Paris tourism. Eoghan Corry, editor of Air and Travel magazine and Travel Extra, is on the line. Eoghan, good morning.
Good morning, Pat. Yes, and St. Denis is where also the boxing will be taking place. A lot of Irish fans heading for the Olympics. A lot of our focus will be on those boxing venues.
Yeah. So over tourism, I mean, recently, last year I was in Venice, and I mean, it was off season, best time to go, but it was so densely packed. Walking through the narrow passageways where all the shops are and where people live and so on, very packed. And queues for every main attraction. There are places in the world that are really oversubscribed.
There are, but there aren't that many of them. I'm always astonished that when this debate started getting a little bit of wind behind it about 10 years ago, Venice was where there's a big concentration in Venice. There's a slogan, Venice is not Disneyland. It's chanted by the protesters, and it oddly enough starts showing up in graffiti as well. Big focus on Barcelona, big focus on Dubrovnik. Not many other parts of Europe have had an over-tourism debate. But it tends to pop up every time there's a debate in countries, as every country in Europe shares problems with housing, with depopulation of the inner city, as sort of a donut effect, all of those things. And over-tourism gets mentioned a lot, but there aren't a lot of places that are actually suffering from it.
Yeah. One text here, we'll take Emily if Paris doesn't want her. Emily and Tuam. The crew can paint and clean up all they want.
They do have a really good point. There are 5 counties in Ireland get more than 1 million visitors a year. Basically, Dublin, Galway, Cork, Kerry and Antrim. I think if Emily showed up in Longford to do her tourism special, there wouldn't be anybody putting up graffiti.
Yeah. So this problem, though, of over-tourism, when you see the queues trying to get up Mount Everest, you think the world's gone mad.
There's a vulnerability. There's a separate argument, and that is where places are vulnerable. You see it this year. Antarctica, the number of people going to Antarctica every year used to be about 50,000 a year. I think you were doing a radio show when I did my specials from Antarctica a few years ago, and that is going to go past 100,000 this year. You hear it talked about, particularly with safari, with bush locations, natural locations which are fragile. We saw. The debate is there with Machu Picchu in Peru as well. The protests in Machu Picchu weren't related to that. But when you have a fragile environment with even a smaller number of people coming, that it becomes a debate of what is over-tourism. For Venice, it's one thing. For a fragile bush savanna location, it's something quite else. Even a couple of hundred people can drive it over what is safe and what is acceptable.
Yeah. I suppose with the advent of the latest VR, virtual reality technologies, there is another way of immersive experiences without actually going there, without the queues, without the long haul flights and so on. You can actually experience it. No, I know it's not quite the same as being there, the smells and all the rest of it, and some of the hardships involved are part of the whole experience, but still, you might just stay your hand rather than despoil an area and just enjoy it through virtual reality.
Yeah, it became a big thing, obviously, during the pandemic. They can recreate the smells. They can recreate almost everything. Where virtual is going to save fragile exhibits or fragile parts is places like Lascaux, the cave with the paintings of the horses by the cavemen from thousands and tens of thousands of years ago. They built a replica Lascaux next door because bringing people in and out affects the humidity. Best example of that close to home is Newgrange. Really, they have to limit, quite clear in the 90s, they had to limit the number of people getting into the actual passage grave. They've rebuilt the passage grave and it got a big refurb. If listeners haven't been in the last few years, it got got a real good refurb during the pandemic. And we saw in Marseille where an underwater cave where three divers had dived trying to get in to look at the prehistoric paintings has been completely recreated on land. So virtual is great. We haven't found that people like to sit back in their home in Kansas and climb Carrantoul with a headset. That really hasn't worked. But where it is working to prevent damage by tourism is where an exact replica close to the site or near the site can be built.
Anyway, Eoghan, look, thank you very much for joining us. That's travel journalist Eoghan Corry.